7:02. And I will call the meeting of the Board of Finance, Town of North Stonington to order. This date, July 6th, 2021, 7:02 again. Present is myself, Dan Spring, Chair, Brett Mastriani sitting in for Paul Simon, Mike Anderson, Carolyn Howell, Ann Aiken, and Dan Smith. Also in attendance is our alternate, Sarah Nelson. Okay, second on the agenda would be public comments. Christine, if you could help me out there for something I might not say.
Yeah, right now we have 2 of the 3 selectmen on and 1 member of the public. So if any of the 3 of you would like to make public comments. Oh, Joe just signed on. Give him a minute. Joe, we're at public comment. Do you have a comment or you want to wait for the end of the meeting? Joe, you're muted.
All right.
You got it.
We can hear you now, Joe.
Yeah, no, the comments are just pertaining to agenda items, correct?
Dan, is this just for agenda items or is this anything?
Usually it's just agenda items. Got to keep things on track.
What's that mean, Dan? Dan, my comments I've been working very diligently on the last few days. And that's the school building repurposing committee and the school modernization committee. And I've gone back through 2017, the original meetings all the way up through. So I have a very concern with that and allocating more funds to the maintenance of the building compared to the demo and the things where we put it into the ad and redo things and that. So that's my only concern. I can't support any more funds going into the maintenance of that building because the committees, which I've reviewed, and can you see me on there? I've done all of this amount for this is since 2017. And I got the school purposing, this is since they formed the committee. And I can't discuss it over the phone type thing because it wouldn't do justice, but I feel I have a concern and I think they did a job, but I feel that it also represents that both committees here have a very concerned effort regarding the demo of that old building and monies and so forth. So that's my only comment now, and I don't think you can discuss that tonight at the meeting, but
Yeah,
I
it's
want
not
to
an
get
agenda.
it somewhere, please.
Joe, I know it's not an agenda item. I know in past meetings we have talked about the demo and how that developed. I can tell you there's going to be a special meeting called next week, next Wednesday, Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance to discuss the old middle high school.
Okay.
Next Wednesday.
That would be one of these phone type, the type of
Yeah.
meeting we have now.
Yeah,
That was
Zoom
my only
meeting.
concern. There's so much in these things that the individuals have mentioned. And what the committees have come up with, and that demo is a very high concern. And like I say, now we're going for more funding for the maintenance and that, and it's gonna get a lot deeper than what it was. So I'll probably attend that meeting if I can.
I would expect you'll be there. I appreciate it, Joe. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Any other public comments, Christine?
Doesn't look like it. If we have any other public comments, just unmute yourself and start talking. Doesn't look like it.
Okay. All right, the third agenda item is our continuation of the Board of Finance policies review and approvals. Now, we have approved appropriations. We rescinded the loss of revenue policy. This is just in review. I think we're probably ready to talk about unassigned. I know Dan Smith has been working on it and did a resubmission as of yesterday, I think. So I hope you all have had a chance to look at Dan's submission. Dan, were you working with somebody else, if I recall, Ann and Brett?
Yeah, I was working with Ann and Brett. Just to give you a high level of what this version 2 was, I know a lot of the comments were to switch it from months to percentages. I did that, and then I started looking at it a little bit more further, and then I'm like, all right, how? I know other comments were, well, what about this and what about that, and what happens if we go over, we all go over the 16%? Where does it say it? Well, it was stated in that policy. So what I did was I kind of broke it up into like concise sections. In the event of the undesignated fund balance overage, shortfall. So it's very pointed. So if you're not familiar with the policy, if you have a question, you can go right to that section.
Right. Have other board members had an opportunity to review that submission? Okay. Sarah,
Yes.
Carolyn, Mike. Okay. Why don't we start with any comments that might be relative to the review? Mike?
I had one comment about the objectives. I thought maybe we should add one about improving the town's ability to obtain financing, showing a strong fiscal profile. As we know, that helped us get the FDA loan and what have you. That could be in one of the objectives.
Yeah, I think, actually, I think that's a strong point. Does everybody else have a consensus on that? I think.
I don't know
That's
if
a
we want to come,
good idea.
I think
come
we
up with some
wanna
wording.
Demonstrate a strong fiscal profile. Whether or not we direct it towards the debt market, I mean, that could be the add-on, but that's really the reason why we do this. I mean, to give us opportunity to pull in from other sources when necessary, whether it's a capital project or otherwise. Some agreement
And I
there?
had one,
Let's finish that one, Mike. Does
Sure.
anyone have got some agreement on that one, everybody?
Yes,
So
sir. Oh, go ahead, sir.
improves town's ability to obtain low interest funding.
I think to present a strong fiscal profile with the intent of taking opportunity in the debt markets.
sounds good.
Mike, you had another one?
Yeah, it's more just I guess the lawyer and me coming out to, when it says in the event of undesignated fund balance shortfall, the second sentence, this restoration of funds to the prescribed, there should be a word there, percentage of the annual operating expenditures. Just says prescribed of, and there should be a word there.
Prescribed level, prescribed percentage.
Yeah, prescribed percentage, I think, because we're using percentage.
I agree. That makes perfect sense.
I agree with that.
Okay,
All right.
And I
Mike,
guess, I mean, this is a comment, and it's maybe it's just for, I just kind of like to see the rationale maybe at the beginning of the document and then going into the policy versus the policy and then the rationale. I mean, that's, it's kind of like a mission statement and this, and then you go into, what your actual policies are or whatever. That's just kind of semantics.
No, I think that's a good idea, actually. I know as I wrote the other one, I had the rationale, but it was further down, but by prefacing everything else, you get an understanding of why those things are in there, having read the
Right.
rationale.
Put it right
Alright.
under the undesignated fund policy, put the rationale up there.
No, I think you
No.
put the rationale. And then you put the policy.
Okay.
Yeah,
So my PDF is very slow right now.
So it'd be the
And then
ration.
go ahead, Dan.
So the rationale would be first, then it would talk about the undesignated policy is designated to maintain adequate, unencumbered. Do it that way or flip
yes,
flop it?
Yes.
All right.
Rationale first, and then you put the policy.
are you all set, Mike?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Should it be based on like the highest monthly average since it's a percentage, but it's, some months are lower than others? I mean, does it matter? I'm just throwing it out there.
I,
For example, in July, if you have your top heavy and you have a lot of insurance payments going out, and then maybe there's other months where, later in the year, I don't know, since you're specifying it.
It's specifying a percentage though, correct? It's not, right? Are you talking under the maintain an adequate reserve to support 1 month's expenditures?
1 month, and then below it, it talks about the percentage, but the percentage changes. So, I mean, I don't know if it matters or not.
yeah, I understand what you're saying.
The average percentage.
Yeah, if we go with the percentage of July or August, one of the really, really heavy months, then 2 months worth of that percentage is going to be something higher than what I think we ought to put forward. I know a lot of the things that we fund are paid right up front. So, I mean, it's probably 2 or 3 months worth of payments that we make right up front. And if we say that we're going to do 2 months worth of that heavy loading, we're going to have way too high of a percentage. So I think we have to really stick with average.
All right, Sarah?
So are we talking, and I just want to make sure I'm following. I know exactly what I think I know exactly what Ann and Caroline are saying, but when I look at the document, I lost the document. I had it up a second ago. Are we saying expenses or revenue? Like, is the percentage expenses or our revenue? Because they're two different things, right? Our expenses don't exactly equal our revenue. So curious, does it matter which number we're using?
Well, we're actually talking expenses, but I mean, it's linked to a balanced budget, which means revenue should be offsetting expenses. But, to meet the functionality of the town, I think we're talking about what the average expenses would be.
So are we using like, if I look at the audit report, are we using the 23 million of expenses that we had for 2020? Like, what number do we use?
We use the budgetary expenditure number.
Okay.
Dan Smith, would you be able to forward me the draft version that you guys are working off of? Because I wasn't on the original email and I now have a big question mark as to what you guys are talking about.
Sure.
We'll give Christine a minute and then we'll pick it up again.
Maybe if you just said 1/12 instead of 1 month, I don't know. I know it means the same thing, but.
That, but then you're dividing it up equally. If you just take it as percentage whole of a chunk of money.
Yeah, I don't have a concern with, I mean, I think the assumption is when you're doing a percentage, the percentage is, you know,
Okay.
whatever the number is divided by 12. So I think percentage is fine. I just wanted to do the math. Because I feel like, Dan, the percentages were a little bit lower than maybe what we had talked about when we met 2 weeks ago. I thought we were closer to like, right now we're closer to like 18% in our undesignated fund, I think, if I remember correctly, if my notes are right. So if we're at 18%, what does that mean? Like, it would be good to understand tactically what that means if we're setting the policy at 16.5. So I'm just curious, not like pro or against it. I'm just curious how that would work. Like, what would we actually do?
Well, I think, Dan, by putting in a minimum level of 8.5% is talking a 1 month reserve against our current budgetary expenditures. If we put in 2 months, then we're saying that the floor minimal level should be 16%.
Yeah, and that's what, Dan, I was just trying to do the actual math. So I think right now, if I remember from last, and I could be wrong, but our actual undesignated fund, when we talked about it 2 weeks ago, was actually around 18% of our expenses.
Yeah, I think that's prior to us using any of that 400 and something thousand.
But you haven't actually
I'm
used
not
any of that.
Right.
Yeah, if we were to use it, you know, the 440,000, we're down to, just quick in my head, like a 15.7%.
The only thing on the percentage that I could say is, I think at most, we could go to a maximum of 17%, which would be 2.5 months. Is that correct? 17%?
Roughly.
I think anything more than that, we're really overtaxing our population.
Yeah, and I wasn't necessarily saying it's too high or too low. I just wanted to understand if we find ourselves in a situation where we're over that 16% right now, what does that mean? And Dan has it outlined in terms of, you know, the rest, you know, we'll lower the mill rate, but I guess when does that line draw? Right now we're over 16%. I'm just trying to understand tactically how the policy executes.
The way I would prefer it to be is that I would have a target maximum level, but it would still be at the discretion of the Board of Finance as to, it automatically hits a trigger where we apply it to the mill rate. Or Dan Smith?
If you go down the bottom of the first page, it said under undesignated fund balance review. The undesignated fund balance limit shall be reviewed and approved annually no later than December 1st of each year by the Board of Finance to determine compliance with the bond rating agencies' recommendations and annual audit findings. We could set it right now to what we think it's going to be, and then next December we address it again prior to the budget.
So on a logistical side, if you find on December 1st that there's too much in the undesignated fund, then how does the town act on that? Like the town hall part of things?
We would address it during the budget.
So it would be for the next fiscal year cycle. Okay.
So we're kind of working.
Yeah, it says one fiscal year.
I just got it now. So you guys have to cut me a little bit of a break.
Yeah,
Oh, no, I was just saying, I read it right as you were saying it, that's all.
It'd be interesting to say that, at the discretion of the Board of Finance, overage an overage of the target level will be considered in the budget process for the upcoming.
Well, we kind of say that already by doing it by December 1st. We're never probably ever going to start the budget process before December 1st.
No,
Or even before January 1st. I would assume that sometime in December, when we have a couple of meetings, we would pull the policy out and we would end up looking at the annual, the audit report will come in. We'll have time to digest it. We'll look at the preliminary and then we'll be able to set it. So we're on the outside of it right now, but this would be the time of year that we would end up setting the high and the low range for this.
Mike?
Dan, I don't know what you mean by setting the high and low range at this time.
Well, when you review the policy, you would be setting the high and the low based off of the annual report every single year.
So you're just
Why
saying the
does-
dollar that number, right, Dan?
Oh, it's based off the percentage.
Right.
If we find out that 19 is a better number, we set it to 19.
Yeah.
I don't think we're
So-
going to know that, Dan, until we finish the budget. Like last year, we decided at the end, the budget percentage is going to be X because we got to use so much for this year's budget. And just like you say, in the event of the undesignated fund overbalance, it's going to be, I have some language to fix there too. That's some wording that's we have to look at. But during the budget process, if we're seeing that we have, to Sarah's point, an undesignated fund that's at 16.5% at the end of the budget process, we're going to have to refund, lower the mill rate to put that 0.5% back into the pockets of the taxpayers per this policy. So I don't see why it has to be done no later than June 30th when we do our, by the
Well,
budget.
Which is fine. I'm just picking an arbitrary date where I'm like, all right, well, are we going to do it before the budget season and have plenty of time to deliberate over it, or do we want to do it at the end? We can do it. It's just a date that we can just set. If we want to do it June 30th after everything is passed. But here's the other thing. We don't always pass a budget by then.
So can I make a recommendation based on when the audit's due to the state? So technically, we're supposed to have the audit turned in to the state by January 1st. So I think that should be your target date. Because like this year, we didn't have the audit completed by December 1st. It was a weird circumstance, but it could happen. So if you make it January 1st, then it lines up with when the town has to submit the audit to the state anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Ann, I think you had your hand up first.
Well, taking into account what Mike is saying, and he's got a very good point, I think we should move our review date to the beginning of June 1st, because at that point, we're going to have a very good idea of what our revenues are, what our budget is looking like, and we'll know if we'll need to pull money from that or whether it's in a good place. It seems like a more reasonable place at which to review it.
Well, there's some sense to that. And, this last budget cycle certainly taught us that.
And it has to be over that high percentage for a year, fiscal year, before we do anything with it, correct?
Yeah,
Correct.
that's what we're saying.
Right.
And here's the thing. We shouldn't be planning that every single year that we're going to be robbing out of this to balance the budget.
Right.
We should be working for a balanced budget within our means. Last year we were put up against the wall because of COVID. This year we should not be looking at that we're going to go instantly to this fund to balance the budget.
I agree. This was, I mean, this is an emergency fund balance is really what it is. It's the rainy day fund, whatever you want to call it, but it's really when there are emergencies. That's why we develop this and stick to it. So I
Sarah,
think the
I'm
dates
sorry, Brett.
could be changed.
Sarah, you're next.
Yeah, so I I watched the budget cycle at the end at the beginning of last year, or however we refer to it. And so I remember when you got to the point where the budget was finalized, and then you acknowledged that you needed to take money out of the undesignated fund. I'm just guessing, and I think that might have been what Anne was talking about. That's the point where you would know like where the budget stood. At that point, you would know if you had an excess of the 16% or whatever the percentage we decide. So in Dan Smith, maybe the December 1st date doesn't preclude us from doing it then, if the wording is to imply that you have a whole full year, just as long as we have the flexibility to do it at whatever the point in time is that makes the most sense to be able to close out the budget, realize that we have this surplus, and then I and then I have another question, but maybe we can save it for later, which is like, what if you have like an extra $5,000? Like, what is that? Does that actually calculate into any sort of mill rate decrease? I'm just curious, like how that, like depending on what you actually have.
Yeah, that's
you
why
do?
I would like to have some wording where the Board of Finance has discretion as we max over the max target, simply because of that. And, I don't think that we should look to, as we hit 16%, just automatically give every penny, dollar, thousand, whatever it might be, to the mill rate. So I think Brett was next, and then you, Dan.
Yeah, I just want, part of my concern is, if we do it near the end of budget season, that this is now used as part of that budgeting process, saying, wow, we're over 16%. Maybe we can just use that to bring it down, our budget down, and bring our percentage down on the reserve account. So I'm a little nervous there, but I can tell you from all the different towns that I reviewed that have a policy in place of a maximum, they do have, it's not at the discretion of anybody. I mean, they have it set out. They do have another choice. So where they can use it instead of, so if it's a smaller amount, they can use it to do prepay some debt down instead of turning back to the mill rate. So that might be something you could put as an option. But I think having an end certainty for the general public to look at a policy and say, okay, well, I know if it goes over 16%, that one of these options is going to happen, not that we can decide if we're going to do anything or not. I do think you have to have some definitive language in there.
Dan, I'm going to hold you off. Anne, why don't you go, because maybe Dan can step in on it.
Well, I think in the case of what Sarah was saying, if we're like 5,000 over, I think if we address the percentages at the time that we're concluding the budget cycle, then we can just take that 5,000 and use that to slightly mitigate whatever mill rate increase we're going to have. I don't think we have to automatically turn around and refund it to people.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and that's why I think using the word discretion, we can decide at that point, gee, okay, how do we employ that surplus? Dan, you had a comment?
Well,
Dan Smith?
that's what
Welcome
Dan
back.
says.
Dan Smith, did you have a
Yeah,
comment?
so basically having the one fiscal year hold on any overages kind of mitigates if you have a $5,000 increase, an overage of $5,000 or $10,000, because then you can adjust it the next year. Maybe it will grow into another $100,000 from that. So you're not every single year having to pay out the overage.
Yeah, again, because I think it
I
should
me
still be
personally-
discretion, discretion of the Board of Finance. But we've already stated in the policy how we would use the unassigned. You know what I'm saying? We've already said that.
Yeah, which I think if as soon as we say the words at the Board of Finance discretion, not saying that we, the trust isn't there for people, but if it's in black and white and they can read it and this is how we're going to use it, discretion can be stretched quite a bunch of different ways. I would prefer to keep it just black and white.
Mike Anderson?
I just want to go back to the annual review real quick. Are we talking about the limits that we're going to review it and say, all right, we've got such and such dollar amount in there and we want to, after this budget season, have 16%? What does that mean, that reviewed and approved? Dan, what did you mean by that?
You're gonna look at the annual report. You're gonna find out where a percentage should be, because if I'm correct, Dan, the audit tells you who and how much we should have as a minimum, correct?
The audit will demonstrate it. It's not telling us.
It's
but
not telling us, but it will give us an idea of what our base should be. And we can do a market analysis across different towns, or we can look at, hey, we're eating up a lot of this. Maybe we need to save a little bit more. That's why we should be reviewing it every single year. But
I don't disagree that it should be reviewed. And I guess to Christine's point, if the deadline is January 1st, then it should be reviewed by that point. I just don't know what the approved means, because which goes back to my point. What is, we don't know what we're going to have in the undesignated fund until we get done with the budget season.
so maybe we say it's reviewed in December and we approve it by, I don't know, the close of the budget, something along like that.
Yeah.
Do you have
I
better?
just say just review it. I mean, it's going to be reviewed to make sure that we're in compliance. That's really all we need to do as a policy.
Yes, but every policy that we have and we change, we have to vote for it as a board. So we're hence approving it. Correct?
Sorry, Dan, are you saying you want to reapprove the policy every year, or does the policy dictate that we review the amounts in the undesignated fund and then approve what we do with it?
Dan, if we change this policy, which is say we change it from 16, we have it approved this year at 16, and next year or the year after we change it to 18, we have to reapprove this policy, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So we're approving the policy every single time we change this policy. We have to vote for it as a board, and we're changing the policy and put it up to a vote.
Dan, I agree. I hear what you're saying there. But then it should be the undesignated fund policy should be reviewed and approved, not the fund limits. You know what I'm saying? I don't.
Really, the whole point of this whole policy is to set a high and a low.
Right.
Really, that is the whole point. You're setting a high and a low and setting the terms of how you're going to use it.
Yeah, but it's always going to be a percentage of your budgetary expenditures.
that's right.
Dan, I think what we're saying is you did such a good job with the percentages that we don't need to reapprove it every year. I think what we
Yes.
need to approve is what we got to do with the fund. Like we have to follow the policy. We assess the budget at a specific time. We just discover that we have in excess of $5,000, and then we have to approve what we're doing with it as a board with that money. And I don't know that we would need to change the percentages every year. It seems like that should hold pretty well year over year.
I agree with Mike and Sarah on that, where I don't think we need to change it every year. And I think it's something that comes up and those numbers need to be changed, then we do it just like this and we put it on the agenda and change that policy. I do think putting it in and making it too targeted makes it a little more difficult.
Yeah, I think we want a set policy that, you know, is kind of black and white, but we don't want to compromise a little discretion or authority over what may happen. I mean, we know there are things that happen that will happen that we don't have foresight of. And relative to Anne, she mentioned the June date for review. However, we are levying the tax prior to that. We're setting the mill rate on budget approval.
So,
Go ahead, Ann.
so the question would be, how did, for the annual review section, what does everybody want to put down there?
Well, I think we should review it every year. I don't see anywhere in the policy where it says we're going to change it every year. It just says we're going to review it every year. If we do decide that we want to change it, then we would have to update the policy and reapprove the policy. But all Dan is saying in here is that we're going to review it every year, which I think
Yeah,
is a wise.
but he says approved. So I think you take out shall be reviewed annually. I'd say by January 1st, to Christine's point. And I think that's a good thing. I think we should make sure that that's reviewed and we know exactly what's in there as we go into budget season.
Yeah, if you just take out that approved part, I think then it does
I think that
accomplishes
makes
what
sense
you're
to
looking
me.
for.
And just on the language, if I may, in the event of the undesignated fund balance overage, it says expenditures as stated in this policy after one fiscal year, the Board of Finance shall, take out the is. And then refund, not refunded.
The is shall is in the shortage as well.
Mhm.
And do you want to have just refunded as opposed to debt reduction?
I'd like the debt reduction in their language, just so we have discretion.
Yeah, I'd like to add two options. Because it's still town tax money, and if we
It's
have
still
debt, it's taking care of that, and if it's the mill
Right.
rate, it's taking care of that, so it does benefit the town both ways.
So you can do semicolon and or apply the overage to debt reduction.
Yeah.
Sua sponte. I'm just kidding. That's a
Like, I'm gonna send, when I'm done with mine, I'm gonna send it to you first before I send it to anybody else.
All right, does anybody else have points of comment or review on the policy? All right, on mine, if I might, going up to the bullets under undesignated fund policy, bullet number 3 and the last bullet, there's redundancy there.
Pick one. Which one do you want to keep?
Let's see here.
I like the last one.
When you're rewriting these things 3, 4, 5 different times and rewording it, things get left in.
And then you have 15 people staring at it on a screen, shouting edits at you.
This is daily lately.
Then you have a lawyer giving his opinion, it gets rough.
Good thing I'm not paying the lawyer bill.
not opinion. Just the facts.
Oh, that's right, they don't give opinion unless paid.
Yeah. The short-term borrowing thing, so let me just bring this to your attention. That really is exercised by an appropriation. So, you know, what we're already doing is throughout this, we've talked about appropriations. So, if short-term borrowing was needed, general government would come to Board of Finance for an appropriation. So we are not executing short-term borrowing.
So do you want to strike that whole last bullet?
Yeah, why don't we just do that? It's gonna make it easy.
President Trump's third press secretary, most
Yeah,
well-known.
the borrowing authority of the municipality is general government, not Board of Finance.
President Trump, who had worked with him on the campaign.
Yes, Ann?
So you're going to strike the last bullet and you're going to add a bullet about presenting, it helps the town present a strong fiscal profile to improve.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
All
right.
Let's see if there was anything else here.
Administration, but it is certainly notable that she has decided to step down when she was really.
Who's got the news on?
Yeah, awful, terrible.
I think it's Joe Gross, my guess.
And the only other thing I had was under unassigned designated fund policy rationale. And does everybody have clarity in the second paragraph? Just on review, I just want to be sure everybody understands that.
Surprisingly, that is one I really didn't even mess with from the current policy. Really, the rationale is the rationale. I think it's pretty much exactly how it is
Yeah.
right now.
I just want to be sure everybody has a sense of clarity on it. Okay,
Because if I remember right, Dan, just so I can say out this paragraph right here pretty much sums up why we got rid of the other policy,
yeah, revenue loss,
the revenue loss. This pretty much cinches it right up.
right, exactly. Yeah. Other than that, Dan, good job.
Thank you.
Does everybody want to see the amended before we approve?
Yeah, I could send out a fresh copy to everybody. I'll run it to the lawyer first, make sure it's all legal, and we'll be good.
Is that Mike Anderson?
Yes.
I'll be in my unofficial capacity.
Right.
Say the free attorney. Yes.
Actually, Mike, if you have legal tweaks that you think some stuff words a little bit better, some wordsmithing on some of the stuff, just send it to me directly.
So are we
Okay.
looking to approve this at the next meeting then? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think everybody should have a kind of a clean look and approve based on the amendments. Does everybody kind of agree to that?
yeah.
But other than that, good job. I appreciate everybody's contribution. This is an important one.
And I do think growing it higher will be more difficult, or if we drop down, growing it higher naturally now that with the school having their fund, we won't be getting as much turned back to us, obviously. So that'll change our growth rate in this as well. And I think we should always remember that. So there is that fund as well.
Yeah. I've talked about this in the past, but in my early years, I always wanted to get the potential of that give back because we needed to get to the levels we did, and it took 10 years to do it. And now looking at what we've done in terms of approving the RISA account, what I want to stay away from is those one-time big expenditures in the Board of Ed budget, which I'm hoping this just kind of smooths things out as we
Yeah,
move forward.
That should mitigate it, you would hope. But now it's maintaining this high percentage. So if there is an emergency, we're good.
Right. All right. The other one, so we're really whittling this down. So the only other one we have out there is the balanced budget policy. And I think that Sarah and Paul were working on that. Sarah, I know you've shared some input on that, but I don't think we're at a draft or even near to a final. What do you think?
Sorry, I was muted. No, I'm not ready yet. I have some changes that I'm making. But it's the reconciliation policy, which I guess is also
Right.
the balanced budget. Yeah.
I mean, it's something that's mandated by state statute.
It is, but I read the state statutes that it refers to, and they're not very directional. Like they don't give operational guidance on how to manage it. In fact, they refer, one of the state statutes that it refers to is the one that we eliminated the policy for, which was related to the liability of the budget if somebody went over their budget. So it was, I didn't find that it was duplicative when I read the policy of the statute, but rather it provided guidance on how to execute it sort of operationally within the town. So part of what I'm wanting to finish up is actually to chat with Christine a little bit about how the reconciliations actually operationally work, so that we can provide, specific tweaking on the language. But I personally, didn't see that it was duplicating the statute at all, honestly.
Okay. All right. And
And
I
I
know
mean,
Paul was
Sarah,
your
does it-
partner on that, but Paul's been
Yeah.
busy. I understand that.
Yeah.
So,
I can step in for Paul since he's obviously doing what he's got to do with
Mike, I appreciate that. Sarah?
the,
That'd be great. I'll connect with you offline, Mike. Thanks.
all right.
All right, that's terrific. All right. So that takes us to the next agenda item, which is previous minutes. And we're still missing one meeting. Are we up to date except for one?
Correct.
Okay, all right. So that's something we'll pick up at the next meeting. Also, because this is early in the month, we don't have the reports that we normally review. So, so in our next meeting, which would be 2 weeks from now, we'll have all of those reports. All right. So we're on to future strategies. And the first one I had was just the budget schedule. I know Nita is on. I mean, is there anything there, Nita, that you want to make a point of?
Not really, although Christine, you might want to mention how you moved up one of the things that was on there that came out in the most recent one.
Yep, so we changed when the Board of Selectmen is going to be discussing the budget, just because there's not enough time to get them the budget since they're due on Friday and we send their packets out on Friday. I don't have an opportunity to format everything in a way to send it to them. So we've pushed their review of the budget to January 26th, but that doesn't push anything else back. So.
Mhm.
And we did send this budget schedule out to everyone with a reminder. I copied you all on that with the form that they need to fill out for your review, and just letting them know so that they know if they're presenting, what day they're presenting.
So relative to that, be right with you, Brett, on the template that Sarah developed and we approved, all that was sent out. We did get an inquiry from the chair of Board of Ed, whether or not she should use the form for her transfers as opposed to perhaps attaching the transfers that they have with their monthly financials. And so we thought we'd bring that question to the Board of Finance members. Ann?
I have no problem with them attaching it as a list, as long as there is rationale for the transfers.
Sure. Anybody else on that point? Dan Smith?
Yeah, I agree with Ann. If it's just gonna be a spreadsheet with a bunch of numbers on it, I'd like to have a little more fidelity to it where it states, all right, it was this, it came from this line, just so we don't have to go through and if they have, let's just say 50 transfers, we have to look at every single line item. It should be pretty simple to go through. If it has like a title, it got moved because of this, got moved because of this, got moved because of this.
All right, I'll pass that on. With that, Christine was a little parochial about, well, you don't have authority over our line items. Yes, I know that. So she was inferring, should we be overly questioning their line items in the budget? Dan Smith.
Yeah, but all those line items make up their budget, and that's, we do look at that. So we need to look at everything. That's how I would respond, but maybe other people have a different opinion on that.
Yeah, again, we're oversight. Caroline?
I just think that all we're asking for is a little clarity to understand like why the money was transferred and does it make sense? And then maybe next year we won't have to keep asking the same questions because we'll understand why certain things are moved from one line to another, during the year.
Fine. I'm going to pass that on.
And Brett both have their hands up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I put my head down. Brett, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up again the March 1st presentation of the Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen budgets as presented to the Board of Finance. I know we talked about it at the December 2nd meeting. Dan, and you were going to reach out to Mike and Christine about the necessity of that meeting because it was brought up that, the timeline of presenting the Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen's budget takes a long time. So that's when we talked about splitting it up between the 2 days instead of doing the presentation to the town. Because I do think, and I said it then, is it will confuse the town. I understand we want to be as open and transparent with everything, but the town has the ability to attend all of these meetings prior to this, as well as the presentations to the Board of Finance on that February 17th and February 24th. So they don't have to sit through both of those if they don't want to. I think it's very strange that we're doing a public presentation, or the Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen are doing a public presentation of the budget before the Board of Finance even discusses it again. When they just presented it the week before. And I know, like I said, we talked about it at the December 2nd meeting. You stated you'd reach out to them to get more detail on why that might be necessary.
As I spoke to them, they had no problem in presenting separately. If that's the issue.
No, I'm talking about the public presentation. So again, on Monday, March 1st, they're presenting their budget without any feedback from us, obviously, to the general public. So I think for the population that doesn't understand the budget process, that can actually be more confusing than anything else, because they can see it that way. And then once the Board of Finance goes through things again, it won't be that same budget. And if people doesn't pay attention to the following meetings after that, it could lead to disaster, really, because now they thought something was in the budget that wasn't in the budget because it was presented before we talked about it.
Well, they have discretion over their budget, and we've given them guidance. And I think the rub would be if they don't meet guidance, and I think we'll have a look of that before March.
It's the week after they present it to us.
Right. Any other
Correct.
comments on what Brett's saying? Dan Smith?
Actually, could you refresh my memory? I thought we only gave the 1.3 guidance to the Board of Ed, and we didn't give the Board of Selectmen any guidance. I might be wrong.
No, that's correct.
That's correct.
So they are operating with pretty much go make your budget, come to us. So we never I know I put forth a motion to have both set to 0, but that didn't go through.
Sarah?
Sorry, I remembered. I was just remembering Dan's mention. So I don't have any concern, honestly, being, watching and learning the process for the first time last year. I do think transparency is really important. I don't think we can dictate to the Board of Ed or the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, whether or not they can have a meeting. So I get your concern, Brett, like about confusion. But honestly, like there was a lot to follow just with all of the meetings. I mean, you guys went line by line at one point and like took things out. And I shouldn't say you guys because Brett, I don't think you were on the board at the time, but there's like, it's just a fluid process. And I think, people who want to be engaged and pay attention will appreciate understanding what the first view of the budget is, and what the evolution looks like. And folks that aren't worried about that aren't going to attend. So I guess personally, I'm not concerned. Just an opinion.
Yeah, I'm not either. Anne, you have your hand up, and I'll come to you, Mike.
I do agree in part with what Dan is saying. To put it out before we've had a chance to give any feedback, I think it could lead to issues. I would like to see them delay their presentation to the public until we've had at least a chance to review and give them a first level of feedback. If they don't want to do that, then I think they should make it very clear at the presentation that the budgets they are presenting have not been fully reviewed by the Board of Finance.
Mike Anderson, and then we'll come back around. Mike?
I think to Sarah's point, I get what you're saying, Brett and Ann. But this is kind of up to the Board of Education and Board of Selectmen to decide what they want to present to the town and when. I mean, we can't really dictate to them when they're gonna do it. I mean, their rationale may be, that, the constituents out there might have more opportunities to talk to us about either things that they like in the budgets or that they don't like in the budgets before we go into our review of the proposed budgets. And if the Board of Education wants to put in, make a presentation, say to the public, this is what we need, and get that message out there as many times as they want, I think that's really their prerogative. But to Ann's point, I think we should make sure that they're very clear that this is the first go around of their budget and it has not been reviewed by the Board of Finance. I mean, yes, we're going to be listening to these budgets and the presentations from the different departments. But we haven't had a chance to review it yet. After they had presented it to us. So yes, they should make it really clear that these are their original provisional budgets, but they should have the opportunity to do that.
Nita, I'm going to go to you next.
No, I've changed my mind. Thank you.
Okay. Sarah, was it you that was?
I don't remember what I was going to say, so it wasn't important. So.
All right. So it kind of seems as if the consensus is let's leave the schedule the way it is. Is that what I'm hearing for the most part? Okay. Dan Smith?
I agree with Mike. As long as we go out, the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen go out and tell them that this is unapproved, has not gone through the Board of Finance. Make the disclaimer as loud as possible, saying that this is what we're proposing, and leave it at that. I just don't want people to get the false hopes or whatnot, or go down a different path, or however anybody's thinking at the time that, hey, It has not gone to the Board of Finance yet for their review.
Brett?
Yeah, I mean, I'll concede to the consensus, obviously, that as long as it's made sure that people are aware that it's,
Yeah.
their original budget before we go through it. But I am pretty aware that neither the Board of Ed or the Board of Selectmen voted to have this meeting like this as of yet, if I'm not mistaken. So I just think if we're talking about transparency, then we should be talking about these are discussed amongst the boards that are involved with this process there. That's all. Thank you.
All right, if it's disaster, I'll take an I told you so. You can have one on reserve for me.
No, I totally understand what you're saying, and I agree that the more it's out there, the better. It just I think sometimes it can circumvent the process and cause some more issues. But I totally understand where you're coming from. My point more was I think the boards that are on here should actually talk about it as boards before meetings are presentations are put out there.
And Sarah, we don't have a policy for throw somebody under the bus. We don't.
I can work on that one if you want.
Mike could give you some pointers, I'm sure.
Yeah, I've been thrown on the bus a lot last year.
I don't know if you've seen back of the buses going around the areas, but they have his name on them.
Hey, at least you know who hit you.
No, that's
Experience
fine.
representation. Don't pick your attorney by accident.
Okay, next on future strategies, I've got annual report, which I make the assumption that it's complete. I did do the narrative for ours. And I think Christine, you were waiting maybe on one more. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm awaiting one. I'm formatting everything. So once I get that one, I can finalize the formatting
Great.
and we'll be good to go. As soon as it's done, you will get email copies of it first before we do anything else with it. So.
Okay. Before I go on to the next one, I mentioned this, I think at our last meeting, as we get into the first month of the new calendar year, we've got to designate our auditing services. And, we've talked in the past about doing an RFP and so forth, but with COVID, it's very difficult to get that done. So I will get a quote from Sandra Wellwood, and we can discuss that at our next meeting. Okay, so everybody understand where we're at with that. Did we have any, talking about Sandy Wellwood, did we get another invoice on COVID? And
Yeah, so I don't have the exact number, but it was just under $6,000 extra that she charged us. We are counting that towards our coronavirus relief funds expenditures through municipal funding, through the state, through the federal government, through the CARES Act. So if we do need to go for an additional appropriation, we are receiving funds from the state to offset it. But I'm kind of holding my breath and hoping that we're not going to need to.
all right, I was hoping that it would be less because I know you.
Me too.
and Susan did a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can talk to her about that. Mike Anderson, I think your hand was up first and I'll get to the others.
I think I said this last year. I'm on the board for Madonna Place, and we talked to we've had the same auditor for years, and which I think is fine as long as they have internal reviews where it's not just Sandra doing all of it. That she has someone else that kind of takes a second look at it. I know in Madonna Place, the accountant that always presents to us has like a blind review by another person to make sure that what she's looking at is legit. So maybe you can just have a conversation with her about that, Dan. That if we're not going to go out to bid, that.
No, you bring up a good point. I've always insisted, and you'll find it in the audit packet, that there be a peer review.
Mm.
You know, just so that we are saying, look, we want to check on you. So I know it sounds a little subjective, but you know, you bring up a good point, Mike, which those on the Board of Finance not accustomed to it. That's something you should be looking at. And maybe in the next year, we get an RFP out. And also, I would say, as Mike is involved and me involved with other nonprofits, it pays to see what the market bears in terms of expense for auditing services. And the other is that sometimes you have to switch it up because of familiarity. And, you know, you hate to use that word, but, you know, that it does creep in. So, Brett, I think you were next, and then Carolyn, and then Dan.
Yeah, I know they gave the range of the extra COVID bill, but is that an itemized bill that we get, and is it based on extra hours, extra forms? And is there any room for, I mean, is it pretty much, this is what it is and you're going to take it whether you like it or not?
The bill had, I think it was 39 and a half hours at $150 an hour, but let me just do the math on that real quick. Yes, because it was $5,925. She had estimated, like I said, I think it was $8,500, and we did everything we could to try to get that down with the time she needed to put into it. But I think a lot of it had to do with what the federal government was requiring for reporting on it. Yeah.
Okay, thank
And
you.
we're hoping to get a reimbursement on that. And I think we're pretty assured of that happening.
All right, very good. Thanks so much, Christine.
Carolyn, you're next.
Did part of the original agreement with her include, you know, a formal presentation to the board? Because that didn't happen. So I'm wondering, are they only billing for hours?
As I said at our last meeting, she is happy to come back and make a presentation to us, still via Zoom, but to make it before the end of the calendar year. One, as I said, she was ill and she was just compressed by.
Right. I mean, at this point, it's neither here nor there. I don't think it's necessary for her to come back. We've already reviewed it. I'm just saying, as part of her agreement with the Board of Finance or the town of North Stonington, isn't it that she would come and make a presentation before we approve it? And that didn't happen. So I'm just wondering, I mean, I understand if she's only billing us for hours worked, but if that's not the case, then shouldn't there not be some sort of credit?
I can ask her that, but she also said that she would accommodate a formal presentation anytime we wanted. So it could be this month, could be our next meeting, could be a special meeting. So, but I'll make that inquiry. Yep. Who was next? Dan, was it you that was next?
Actually, that was the same question I was going to ask Carolyn.
Yeah, I'll make that call. Sure. All right. So the next agenda item is, as was brought up, and I made the request that Board of Selectmen make a presentation about the old middle high school. For this meeting, they came back and said that they wanted something bigger, more expanded, and wanted to do a joint meeting between Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance and schedule that for next Wednesday. So it would be a special meeting. Dan Smith?
Yeah, when I sent you the request for the against this subject, I was looking for the bills, the actual bills, in support of a future meeting itself. You know, right now we're just dealing with 2 line items that are, you know, over, but we have no idea what the actual costs are. What are these bills? What is the power? What is the water? That's truly what I was looking for when I asked, hey, can we request this in advance so we can study these and then we have the meeting? We're going to go into next week's meeting and we're not going to have any information. It's just going to be basically whatever the Board of Selectmen is going to be presenting to us. and we're going to be coming into a cold instead of being able to sit there, study the bills, and then have our questions in advance.
I think Christine did offer that, I mean, she does have the drop down on that line item.
Yeah, I can run the detailed report out of QuickBooks that tells you what each expense is out of there. It's not the, 4-page of each Eversource bill. Are you looking for the actual electric usage, or are you looking for just the?
I'm looking for, hey, we've owned the building for how many months? This is what the electric bill is. This is what the propane or oil bill. I'm looking for that type. We did a bunch of maintenance. Was it maintenance or did something break? That's what I'm really looking for.
Okay, so I can, in preparation for that meeting next week, I can send to both boards the detailed report from QuickBooks.
Yeah, because I'm looking for truly, what are these numbers making up of that we have such an overage that we're going to have this discussion on next week. And I want to make sure that I have my questions prepared, and it's just not going to be Board of Selectmen is going to be talking to us and looking for answers when we still need to review what actually happened.
Yeah, I think Christine is saying that she'll get that out to you. Caroline, you're next.
I think Ann was next, but if you don't.
Oh, and I'm sorry. And I would have to tell you, between your hair and the wall, your hand just, that's better, that's better. Because it's against the window.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll do better in the
Yeah,
future.
I got you now. Go ahead.
I was just gonna follow on with what Dan was saying. In addition to the breakdown that Christine can give us, we also need from the Board of Ed a listing of the service contracts that are associated with that building, because that's another part of the expense. And
I've gotten
Christine
some
can show us
estimates
what we,
from them.
pardon me?
I've gotten some estimates from them.
Okay.
I don't have vendors and contracts, but I do have estimate numbers, so I should be able to have that for you guys for the meeting as well.
Okay, great.
Brett, if you'll yield to Carolyn, then I'll come to you.
So I guess what I was looking for also, in addition to both of these things, is the work that's been performed and by whom. And, was it contracted out, or is it somebody within the town doing the work, and when was it done, and how many hours were involved, and things like that. I like I've repeated over and over at these meetings that I've attended, not only our meetings, but the Board of Selectmen meetings. We have asked for this information. It was never made available to us. We asked for breakdowns. I don't know, it was the beginning of December, and I was told that a bunch of bills had been paid in November, but they didn't have any information to provide to us. So that was already a month ago. And we've still not been sent this information. So, and now they want to have a meeting because they're over. And frankly, I watched that meeting and I was appalled by the blame that was being directed to the Board of Finance and the taxpayers regarding this whole mess. So I'll just leave it at that.
All right. Christine is going to get whatever she has in terms of breakdown. Joe, you're waving your hand around, but you got to wait for public comments. Brett?
Carolyn touched on what I wanted to know too, is if we can get a breakdown of all the work that was performed and whether the town highway department or anyone did that work for any maintenance done in that building. I think it's important to know what we are spending, whether it's out of that line item or out of working hours. And I have to concur with Carolyn. I think it was rough. I don't know if everyone watched that meeting, but the Board of Finance also got thrown under the bus, saying that we approved a budget knowing that there wasn't any maintenance put in there. And I have a hard time with that because that it should be something that was budgeted, but it's not our responsibility when it was brought up and cut out of the budget and spending used for other things. But also, Dan, in your meetings that you go to on the weekly or bi-weekly basis with Christine, Juliet, and Mike, does this stuff come up in that meeting, in the overages or any of the expenditures with that building come up during those meetings? Is it brought to your attention, or
No,
are you
I have not-
blindsided just like us?
No, I have not been at any one of those meetings where it's been brought up. I have not.
Can I just say a couple things really quickly? I just want to differentiate. The majority of the bills for this building are utilities, not maintenance. So I think we need to stop throwing around the word maintenance so heavily. Because I want to say of the $35,000 worth of bills, I'm just going to ballpark that over 32,000 of that is on utilities. So that's the majority of these expenses are on utilities. I will do my best to get as much information as I can on how much time the highway has put into this building. But we just need to all work together as a team on this. No one is trying to throw anyone under the bus. We just need to come up with a solution. I think that I have done my due diligence in informing you when we review the profit and loss every month that we are spending more than we have allotted in that budget line to make sure that everyone is aware. So I do what I can to make sure that everybody is on board and knows what's going on. And, you know, we just need to try to find the solution moving forward.
Yeah, just as an editorial note, I mean, that being a town asset, it's general government's job and responsibility to administer what needs to happen relative to that asset. What we want to know is how is it impacting the current budget in particular? And where do we go from here in terms of forecasting budget requirements? I'm trying to decide who's next. Dan Smith?
So my question would be, has a lease been signed, and how long are we expecting? Are we going to be budgeting this for another 6, 8, 10, 12 months for carrying the cost of this? I know next week we're going to be having this discussion, but that's going to be my main question: is when is this technical bleeding going to stop?
Well,
Technically, we are going to have to pay every single bill that comes in, whether there's revenue coming in to offset it or not. So all the expenses will need to be budgeted regardless of the revenue stream.
yeah, and I think the intent of having a meeting specific to this agenda was to have all the essential participants there and have all the questions answered, so it's not hand to hand to hand. Brett, you're next.
Just so we can go, or so I can at least go into that meeting prepared to. Dan, what is the normal protocol when something like this occurs and we go over a budget item or line item by this much? Is that something that normally would come before us before that amount of money is able to be spent?
General government still has the ability to, transfer assets from line item to line item, or to come for an appropriation. And which is then, we're looking at transfers and we're looking at appropriations, so.
Right, but we haven't seen any of the transfers or appropriations, right? So
No.
usually that would come before us if it was a transfer to pay for this.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah?
Unmute. Okay. I just want to, I want to agree with Christine. So I just want to think about the timeline for a minute, because I remember we had these conversations in, I believe it was November. We were looking at the actuals. Christine actually pointed it out, on her report that this is where the cost is coming out of, because it's not budgeted. She called it out specifically. I'm pretty sure it was the November report we were looking at. It could have been December, but that's only been, it's like the 5th of January. So it's been about a month. So I think we all knew it was a problem. I remember it, and I know we need to solve for it. I think one of the things I'm surprised about is can we get, or curious about is, can we get actuals from the Board of Ed? I remember when there was a special Board of Selectmen meeting about this, I actually asked the question, what is the anticipated cost? Board of Selectmen deferred to Board of Ed, who was on the line, and they gave a number at the time, but it was sort of like a rough order of magnitude. It'd be really helpful if that data is available so we can understand what was previously spent. I know the building isn't being is utilized the same as it was. So hopefully our cost should be lower, but it would definitely give us at least a perspective and an understanding of what the forecast would look like in addition to, the bills that have come in since we've taken over since the town's taken over the building.
The only response I've got to that is the building, for the most part, is shut down to a level of just maintaining temperature, other than the offices that Board of Ed is occupying. So we don't have a complete full utilization of the building versus where it is now is not apples to apples.
And that's understood, but it will at least give us a bit of a threshold, right? So if it cost $100,000 last year, right? So that gives us something, and we can actually see if the town is doing better and managing that better versus, just having no clue. Like, I feel like nobody has any idea right now what it's
I believe the Board of Ed did give that information from my understanding, but they couldn't break it down by wing, is what I've been told by that.
I did not see that.
Yeah, I haven't seen any. I just remember the answer, Brett, from the meeting, but I haven't seen anything in writing.
Yeah, I don't think it's been given to us. I think it's been given to the Board of Selectmen.
Caroline?
I just wanted to mention to Chris Diaz that I'm not directing my frustrations to you. I know you're just the messenger and you're just doing your job. My frustration is with the first selectman and how this has been handled. The taxpayers were told that no tax dollars would be used for this building. It was going to be torn down. It's not being torn down. They still have no agreement unless they've come to one already. So there is no revenue coming in. So I understand the utilities are there, and we discussed that last year in the budget process about how you would have to shut down a building and how you'd still maintain heat or whatever you had to do to keep the building from going moldy or affecting the other parts of the building that are in use. So I get all of that, but this has been going on for a very long time, not just since June. It's been going on since probably a year ago at least. So I apologize if you're taking it personally, but I'm not directing it to you personally. You weren't the ones that made the statement. I understand you're trying to convey the amounts that are going over, and we're just trying to understand what's the whole picture, because we know there's not just the electric bill. We've been asking for that information and it's not being provided to us. And whether it can come from you or the Board of Ed or the first selectman, I don't know, but we're just not getting the information that we're asking for. And that's where my frustration is.
Well, I think in response to that, though, Caroline, we did make the request, and we're moving to a special meeting where I think a lot of that information will come out. Also, and everyone should know this, there are a couple of points here. The demolition was only going to be for the middle school wing. So we were still dealing with the high school, the 2-story piece, which in itself is a big piece. And second link to that is that there was a resolution approved by the town to seek a lease for the middle school. So, and I know that that's in process. So I think we'll get more of that detail as we meet with the Board of Selectmen next week. And I hope all of you can make it. Brett, let's try not to be redundant on some of these things because we're talking over and over and over here. So is there something new?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if Christine was invited to next week's meeting. So if we do have questions regarding Board of Ed or their use of that and their cost, somebody's there to help fill us in on that information. Because yes, it's great for us to meet with the selectmen, but I think having someone from the Board of Ed there would be important because they utilize it and they're responsible for some of the charges, I guess, or whatever it might be. But I think for us to have a whole picture on it, they should be involved somewhat.
I don't know if Christine, he's talking about Christine Wagner.
Yeah, I honestly don't know if
Okay,
Mike's had discussions with Christine on it.
all right. I
right, thanks,
can
Christine.
close the loop on that. Certainly a representative from Board of Ed should be there. Yeah. All right. We done with that? I think we're all going to learn a lot next week. And I think we have to look at it as an asset of the town. And how do we navigate it to the benefit of the taxpayers? So, anything else under future strategies? And I know late in the day today, you asked about the ordinance on whether or not we should move from 2 alternates to 3 alternates. And I know that Board of Selectmen have not developed that, so. Any comment relative to that? Ann, what do you think?
Well, I saw that the Board of Finance had drafted an ordinance, or the Board of Selectmen had drafted an ordinance for the Board of Finance. But it had nothing to do with the ordinance that we had discussed, which was adding a 3rd alternate. And so I would like to have some input on that ordinance before it gets passed by the Board of Selectmen. Because I know we had all agreed earlier the middle of last year, that adding a 3rd alternate would be a good thing to do.
Yeah, I think the issue is one that nobody seemed to have an objection to the idea of a 3rd alternate. So, and then it's a matter of in adding a 3rd alternate, which I hadn't even thought about at the time, is the calculus of, okay, what's the party affiliation? How does that flow? And maybe not be consequential at all. I don't know, because now we got an odd number of alternates, you know what I'm saying? As opposed to potentially one of one party, one that may be independent, or another party, the Republican Party versus Democratic Party. So then if you have a 3rd alternate, is there going to be another Republican, or is there going to be another Democrat? Or,
It's 8:30.
so
Well,
I haven't
I
given
think,
thought to that, so.
I think as long as you specify that not all of the alternates can be from the same party, you get
Yeah,
the mixed
I think we have time to-
representation that you're looking for.
you know, if there's a consensus here, I think we have time to look at that, you know, because ordinances would have to go to a town meeting. So. Sarah?
And how would they have to be elected, right? So would it be like you would add
They
an
would
extra
be elected.
person and then it would be on the next election type of thing if we did it?
Brett?
Yeah, I just want to say there'd be a few things to look into in regard to that. So obviously minority representation would be the one, like you brought up, Dan, but also on the way the votes are cast. So we have some conflicting things already where, so say there's 3 alternates on here and you're only allowed to cast a vote for 1. That goes through, that's on the state level. So there's something, we'd have to talk to the Secretary of State's office on that, of how that would work. Because that was one of the unintentional consequences of when they changed the first selectman drop down to the selectman, that doesn't count anymore. You're actually, even though we're electing 2 selectmen, say, you're only allowed to cast a vote for 1, even though 2 are getting elected. So it would be similar in this situation where we'd have to try to see how the law would be written. Well, our ordinance, and then how that would impact with the law for the people to be able to cast the amount of votes for the right amount of people. So I guess there's a few things we'd have to look into.
Sure. So what I'd be willing to do, Ann, is continue the exploration there, and I'll talk to the Board of Selectmen on it. Any other comment relative to any of that?
Well, maybe just checking with the board present to be sure they want to pursue the matter.
Yeah, to me, I don't have any objection to it, but I'm also ambivalent because of the calculus here in terms of minority representation and what Brett brought up in terms of, because they're elected, how does it work in terms of who can you vote for? How many times can you vote? So, I don't know if we get more benefit or more value by having a third one. Carolyn?
You would have to remember that even though you might be elected by one party, you could change your affiliation after you're elected. So then it might, throw your calculations off again.
The thing is how you were elected is what is maintained during your tenure. Even though you change your party yourself, you're considered how you were elected.
Yeah, at the time of the election is what you're considered for party. The only downside, it's not a downside or struggle I do see with having three is, being a party chair, I know how hard it is to try to recruit alternates sometimes to actually run and participate, because sometimes the alternates go into it. We've been lucky on a few boards where they stay participating, but a lot of times after they don't get to vote or they don't get to participate in the meetings, they drop off. So having three, unless we're not having a lot of people at the meetings, it does make it difficult to have those people engaged where they want to stay on a board and participate and make all the meetings. Because yes, you can come and talk in the discussion, but when you never get to vote in a year, people lose interest. So that would be the only downside of having too many alternates on a board.
Yeah, as I said, I was kind of ambivalent, not against it, but I don't see the added value. So.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Let's pull the board tonight and see if people want to pursue this. If they don't, then we don't.
I'm happy to do that. So why don't we do it? Dan, you've got a comment? Dan Smith?
Yeah, I think with something like this, maybe we wait for Paul to inject his opinion on this and have the seated board have a full opinion on this, because it will be a part. You will be choosing this person if that third person is seated possibly as one of your replacements. So I don't know. I would like to hear Paul's opinion on it before we get polled.
I have no, we're not in a dire rush here. We can table it to the next meeting.
I do agree with like Brett. This board usually is pretty, with Paul being out with, supporting what he's doing right now. We normally have a quorum all the time when we only usually seat one alternate, if that.
Yeah.
Do we really want to have three? I don't know.
Right. The only value I would have brought forward is I have had the experience of having an alternate who never showed up, ever. So having a third one would have been helpful. So. All right.
Bob Carlson has a hand up if you want to take a comment.
Bob Carlson, go ahead.
Hi, Dan. So, Ann, you were worried about the Board of Selectmen voting on that, but the last time we talked about ordinances, we held off on that one because I felt it was Board of Finance business and we shouldn't be voting on, which should be decided by the Board of Finance, not by the Board of Selectmen. So if you look at the last meeting, when we talked about ordinances, we did not speak about that particular ordinance.
Right. I saw that you didn't speak about it, but I missed the reason why. So thank you for informing me of that.
You're welcome.
Dan Smith.
Hey, Dan, I know our last meeting on the 16th, when we were talking about elections and everything, I gave a recommendation about having correspondence from the, either the chair or the vice chair to any other outside boards and everything. And it wasn't a part of this, this meeting. I was just wondering, are we gonna institute that as a constant part of this agenda, or?
I have no problem putting a correspondence on here. I didn't have any input from other chairs at this point for this meeting, but I'm happy to put it in there and we can just say we have some or we don't have some, so.
Okay, that works for me.
All right. That brings us to public comment again.
Joe, do you have a comment? You just need to unmute yourself, Joe.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
You can hear me now.
yes.
All the members of the board, you can invite who you want to your next meeting. I'm going to read some facts and quotes to you, please. I'm going to go back to May 18th. School repurposing committee. No money left for the demo. They're having a discussion. Very difficulty of the committee is having in determining costs and expenses to maintain the former middle high school complex. I'll go back to April 20th and has had the same comments. This committee was formed by the selectmen and that. I got every minute they got, and they have exactly what you're asking for, and they have not got an answer since them dates that I've told you. If you don't have these people there, you're not gonna get anything neither. I'll go back to the other meetings here, which I'll go back to 2017. They're having difficulties too. Your expenses in the school are never gonna stop, and they're gonna continue to go up. As of April 20th, 2020, let me report from the committee. Environmental report conclusions were discussed involving the abatement of PCB in the exterior window cocks in classrooms 100, 109, the faculty lodge, and the kitchen office. Gentlemen, I cannot see putting another penny into that there whole building. You must demo which was there. And I'm gonna question where all the money for the demo went, which was part of the three things. And also how you take the priming thing of that and put that into this ad and abatement thing here to save money. They've taken, and you spent all your monies on it already. They've taken the monies from the, it was the 750,000 transferred of monies between projects. And they also, this was before they could send their report to the state. And you also spent all kinds of money. You spent 40 things and they expect other money coming back. I don't want to go into the detail because it takes too long. I'm stating, I will be glad to sit with anybody. Facts. I've done it for you all the way back to 2017. Any questions you ask has been asked by these two boards and committees. You're not asking anything more than what these guys have asked, and they have gotten no answers. You will get no answers next week neither. And I want to state also, do what you want. February 8, 2018, 1,352 yay, 611 no, better than 2-1 demo. As people within the village don't know what they're gonna look at whenever they get away from that. A lot of politics was in here, and I'd like to ask a question. Who was the representatives from the Lighthouse School, which did the tour back in March of 2020? And who was the representative from the Connecticut Coastal Academy, who did the tour, which Mr. Peter Nehru took for that tour? Can anybody tell me who those two individuals were?
Yeah, but why
I
do
think
we,
I know some,
Joe, why do we need to answer that as Board of Finance?
because there's a lot of politics coming in and it's my retirement money. Dan, I worked my life off to retire. I'd like to spend my retirement money the way I want to retire. I don't want you to spend all my money on my retirement money. I agree, I'll go with you, I'll support you, but I'm asking your support based on facts, not me. Back to 2017, I spent one hell of a lot of time collecting all this data, buddy, and I'll go over it with any one of you. And please, I'm just saying, you guys have got a lot of work to do. My money outside, but I've done a lot of your work for you. I've got it for you. I'm more than willing to discuss it with you. And I just feel that if you can have the selectmen come in education next week, you're not gonna get any answers. These guys haven't gotten any answers back from them on the committees that they formed. Facts, facts, Dan. That's all I'm asking. Spend money wisely. Where did the demo money go? Who was the people who did this? And I'll start bringing in the political environment of what the heck is going on with this here project. We spent over 40-some million dollars that I spent, and we want the job done. That's all I'm asking.
All right, Joe,
And I
a
thank
lot
you
of
for
these
the time.
issues,
I'm
you
ready
know,
to get my comments into you.
all right, your 2 minutes are up and more. But I think we get a little more to this topic at the special meeting next week.
I'll guarantee, Dan, I'll tell you what. You have them next week, and I'll be at that meeting next week, and we'll see how much of these answers that I say you don't get, these people didn't get, that you will get. I'll guarantee you don't get them.
Fair enough, Joe. Thank you,
Joe, that
Joe.
shows a lack of confidence in me to get the information.
Oh, no, I gotta go with you on the audit report there, Krista, right here. Look
I
at
know.
what I've done with the front page. There's a lot of questions that the Board of Finance should have asked, and you haven't. I asked them, and you'll be the one to help me get them correct. Like
I'm
Dan, I
saving-
think you made comments there too on the undesignated fund, which will be reviewed every year, and it's based on the budgetary basis, which is exactly what you said. I don't know if everybody on the board understands what you meant by the budgetary basis. That is something that's developed every year at the time you develop the budget. You can't do that in December, you can't do it any other day. And you don't have to change the amount of money every year, except if you go way over, then you can say, we ought to reduce it somewhere. But leave it stay normal, and it'll be right there.
Yeah, that's why we're staying to percentages.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
Again, anybody, please, you got to answer everything that's going on, but, and I'll bring the politics into it after I get my other two questions answered. Who was the representative from them two people? Then I'll tell you what started happening based on the timeframes with these two meetings right here.
Joe, you want to get on a board? You want to get on a committee?
I wanted to get on the board when I was young and knew what the hell I was doing. I'm too old now, and it takes me weeks to get up here so I can compete with you guys.
And we already have our third alternate.
I'm willing to help you guys.
Well,
I'll do anything to help you. I'm
Don't-
just
don't
too
throw
damn
that-
old
don't-
now, and I can't be-
don't throw the idea out, Joe. November's coming.
You guys are doing a good job. You just need some more help from the outside, and we're here to do it. And Mike Anderson, please, I wish you would call me on these things because I respect a lot of your questions.
I
Thank you,
think Brett's
Joe.
right. We should have Joe as our third alternate.
We just go with it, guys.
Can we
I'm
do
here
a
to help.
polling right now? All right, Joe. Thank you so much. Joe, and thanks for
All
staying
right,
with us for the last hour and a half or whatever it's been here. Thank you. All right, folks, with that, I didn't do it at the beginning of the meeting, but I certainly wish you a happy new year. Thanks for all your contributions, participation. We look forward to a good budget process cycle. Listen to everyone and come up with a very good budget under the circumstances that we have. And with that, I would move to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second,
Second,
Dan, sorry, I don't think we called for
I support it.
comments after Joe. I don't know if it matters. But there was one other person on the line, so I wasn't sure.
Christine, did I miss somebody?
I don't think so. Nobody unmuted. So I think we're good.
All right. Thank you, Sarah, for bringing that up. And I think we're still going to close the meeting. I've got the motion and a second, and I'm going to take it that we're all out. So thank you so much, and special meeting next week. Hope that you all can attend.
Dan,
Thank you. Night all.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And did you have something before I close the meeting, or are you good?
Well, I just wondered who Dan got as the second.
I heard you, Ann, and I heard Dan Smith. I wrote down Dan Smith.
Okay,
I heard his voice, so.
okay.
And I would take the time as 8:45. And we did that.
Okay.
Good
All right,
night,
I'm
John
Thank you.
Boy.
done the meeting now.
Bye, folks.